She was 19 years old, and she had been thrown out. Not asked to leave, not encouraged toward independence. Thrown out on a Sunday evening in November, with a bin bag of clothes and $4.63 that had been in her coat pocket since Friday, and a cardboard box of books her stepfather had set on the front step without looking at her. She had nowhere to go. She knew 3 people in Fenwick, the market town in Suffolk where she'd grown up, and none of them had a floor she could ask for. So on the Monday morning, she walked to the parish council office with her $4 in British pounds, £3.20, exact. And she spent one of those pounds on a lamplighter's hut at the end of Cellar Lane that the parish had been listing for 2 years and that nobody had wanted because it had no running water, no mains electricity, and a reputation among the locals for being, as one councillor had put it in the meeting minutes, more trouble than it was worth. The hut had an oil cellar dug beneath the floor. Meg Farrow didn't go into it for 6 weeks. When she did, she found something that had been sealed inside it for 44 years, and nothing in Fenwick was the same for her after that. If stories like this one are the reason you come here, people who had almost nothing and built something real from it, I hope you'll subscribe before we go any further. It keeps this channel alive. And drop your location in the comments. I read every one, and it genuinely surprises me where these stories find people. Meg Farrow grew up in the same house on Cellar Lane for 15 years. Not the hut, not then, but the terraced house 300 yards from it. The one with the brown front door and the window box her mother Sheila replanted every spring with whatever was on offer at the garden center, and that never quite matched from year to year, but that Sheila maintained. Anyway, with a loyalty that Meg later understood was less about flowers and more about the idea that some things should be tended regardless of the outcome. Sheila was a school dinner lady and a woman of considerable private warmth, who expressed that warmth in the form of food and listening, and a quality of attention that made you feel, when she was focused on you, that you were the most important thing happening in the world. She had married Meg's father young and lost him to a cancer that moved faster than anyone expected when Meg was 3. And she had managed after that with the competence of someone who had decided that managing was what the situation required, and had not permitted herself to think too carefully about the cost. When Meg was 9, Sheila married a man named Barry Croft. Barry sold insurance and drove a car that was slightly too large for his needs and had opinions about most things that he delivered in the tone of someone performing a public service. He was not physically unkind. He was the kind of man who measured his investment in a situation according to what it returned to him, and a stepdaughter returned very little by his accounting. He was present at meals and absent from most conversations that didn't concern him directly. And what concerned him directly was his son from a previous marriage, Callum, who was 4 years older than Meg and who had been installed in the house's 2nd bedroom before Meg fully understood that this was a permanent arrangement. Callum was not cruel either. He was simply indifferent, which in a household of 2 adults and 2 children translates over time into a form of erasure that is harder to name and harder to argue against than cruelty. He got the new bicycle when he turned 12, and Meg got Sheila's old one with the basket on the front. He got the larger portion. He got the first turn at the television. He got the bedroom with the window that faced the garden. None of this was announced or justified. It was simply the arithmetic of the household, and everyone in the household understood it without it ever being discussed. What Meg had was a woman named Dory, who ran the Fenwick branch of the county library and who had known Sheila for years, and who took a particular interest in Meg from the age of about 10, because Meg read everything she could get her hands on, and Dory was the kind of librarian for whom this was reason enough. Dory was 60, small, with reading glasses she lost constantly and found again by the expedient of checking the top of her own head, and she had the gift of recommending the exact right book for the exact right moment, in a way that felt less like guidance and more like prophecy. She had given Meg, over the years, books about navigation and botany and the social history of English market towns and the architecture of medieval field systems, and she had given them with the specific and deliberate generosity of someone who understood that the right book at the right age is one of the things that changes the shape of a person's mind permanently. When Meg was 15, Sheila died. A stroke, quick, at the school where she served the dinners, and then 2 days in hospital where she was mostly not there. And then she was not there at all. It was October. The window box had geraniums in it that lasted another 2 weeks before the frost came, and nobody replanted them in the spring. Meg stayed in the house because there was nowhere else to go, and because Barry said nothing directly about her staying or leaving. He said nothing about much of anything. He processed the situation in the way of a man for whom grief is an administrative problem. He arranged the funeral. He handled the paperwork. He ate his meals on time, and he did not discuss any of it. Meg stayed for 4 more years. She did her A-levels and got decent results, and applied to a university in Norwich that offered a course in local and landscape history that seemed to her to be exactly the right thing, and she was accepted, and she was going. She had a small student loan confirmed, and a place in Halls, and a plan that had taken her 2 years to build. She put her place in Halls down in writing. She told Barry about it at dinner in September, 3 months before she was due to go, because she thought he should know, and because she was, even then, the kind of person who gave notice rather than simply leaving. Barry listened. He nodded. He said, "You'll need to be out by the end of term then. Not the end of the academic year, the end of the school term." December, Callum, he explained, had decided to move back from Leeds and would be needing the room. He said this without apology and without meeting her eyes, in the tone of a man informing a tenant of a schedule change. He reached for the salt. The conversation was over. She had 11 weeks. She saved everything she earned at the part-time job she'd held for 2 years at a hardware shop on the high street. She looked at bedsits in Fenwick and in the nearby villages, and found that nothing available cost less than £450 a month, which was more than her part-time wages and her projected student loan together could cover. She applied for emergency housing assistance through the district council and was told the waiting list was 18 months. She looked at temporary hostel places and found them either full or too far from Fenwick to be practical. She applied for 3 jobs that would have paid enough for a room. 2 didn't reply. 1 replied to say the position had been filled. December arrived. She packed. It didn't take long. The cardboard box of books, the ones Dory had given her mostly, and a few others she'd bought over the years, went on the front step first, placed there by Barry with the efficiency of someone who had made a decision and was implementing it. Then the bin bag. Then the door closed. She stood on the pavement on Sallow Lane in the November dark. The December dark, technically. It was the 3rd. With £3.20 and a box of books and a bin bag and nowhere to go that night. She slept in the library's reading room. Dory had a key and did not ask questions and stayed until Meg was settled and said only, "We'll sort something in the morning." She did not ask whether Meg was all right. She could see that she wasn't. She made tea from the staff kitchen and sat with her for an hour and then said goodnight, and left her with the spare key and the information that the heating timer came on at 6. In the morning, Dory brought a thermos of tea and a list she had made the previous evening of every available option she could think of. The list had 8 items on it. The bottom item, added in a different pen as though it had occurred to her later. Read, Parish Notice, Lamplighter's Hut, Sallow Lane, 1. No takers. Counselor Jim Healy has the key. Meg read the list twice. She set it down. She picked it up and read it again. She looked at the bottom item for a long moment. The hut, she said. It's been listed 2 years. Dory wrapped her hands around her mug. No water. No mains power. The oil cellar below the floor needs clearing out. There are probably things living in it. She paused. It's also a Grade 2 listed building. The parish can't demolish it. They can't develop it. The only thing they can do with it is find someone to maintain it. For £1. For £1. Meg picked up the list. She folded it. She put it in her coat pocket. Where does Jim Healy work? She was in the parish council office by 9. Jim Healy was a man of about 60, with the pink complexion of someone who walked everywhere in all weather, and the measured speech of someone who had chaired too many meetings to waste words. He looked at Meg across his desk and she explained what she wanted, and he said, "You've seen the building?" "Not yet. You'll want to. I'd like to see it after, if it's the same to you." He studied her for a moment. Then he said, "The listing means you can't alter the exterior without consent. The cellar is original fabric. You can't fill it in or cover it. The parish will want a maintenance agreement, annual check." He opened his drawer and found a key on a ring with a paper label. The last person who looked at it said the smell coming up through the floor was something they didn't want to investigate. He set the key on the desk. For £1. She paid the £1. She took the key. She went to see the hut. The Lamplighter's hut sat at the very end of Cellar Lane, where the lane met the old drove road that had once connected Fenwick to the villages to the north. It was made of knapped flint and lime mortar, the particular gray-black of Suffolk flint work, the kind that catches light at certain angles and holds it, so that a dry stone flint wall in morning sun looks almost like it is lit from within. It was one room, roughly 14 feet by 10, with a single window on the south side and a door so low that you had to duck to enter it, and a roof of clay pantiles that had shed 2 tiles over the winter and would shed more without attention. The floor inside was wide elm boards, dark and solid, and in the northeast corner there was a hinged trap door roughly 3 feet square, with an iron ring pull rusted to a dark amber. That was the oil cellar. She could smell it before she opened the trap. A deep, mineral smell, cold and old. The smell of something that has been sealed for a long time and has not forgotten what it held. She did not open it that morning. She stood over it for a moment with her hand on the iron ring, and then she let go of it and stood up and looked at the rest of the room. The walls were sound. She checked them the way she had learned to check things at the hardware shop, pressing, looking for soft spots, listening to what the surface told her. All 4 solid. The roof she could not check from inside, but the 2 missing tiles had let in water at the north corner, and the elm board beneath the leak had darkened, but not rotted, which told her the wood was old enough and dense enough that water took a long time to do its work. The window was single-glazed, original, the glass slightly wavy in the way of old glass. Intact, she stood in the middle of the one room, and she looked at the trap door, and she looked at the window, and she looked at the low door she had ducked through. She thought about £3.20, and the cardboard box in Dory's library, and the pavement on Cellar Lane and Barry reaching for the salt. She thought about the university place she was going to defer. She had already decided this, on the walk to the parish office, without quite noting the decision, and she thought about what a person can build in a listed flint hut on £1, if they are prepared to be patient. Everything about this was a gamble. She had already made it. She moved in that afternoon. This is a hard sentence to write without comment, but it is the accurate one. She put the box of books against the south wall and the bin bag in the corner and the key on the sill, and she swept the floor with a brush she found hanging on the back of the door, which seemed like the kind of thing a person leaves when they expect someone to come after them. And she made a list of what she needed and what she had, and what the gap between those two things looked like. There was a man who appeared in the lane outside on her second morning. A retired joiner named Frank Sayers, who lived in the last of the terraced cottages before the drove road, and who had been watching Sallow Lane for 40 years, and who apparently felt that this entitled him to information. He appeared at the low door and looked in without knocking, which she was already learning was the Suffolk way of checking on a neighbor, and said, "You've taken the hut." "I have." He looked around the room. His eyes went to the trap door. "You've opened the cellar?" "Not yet." He looked at her. Old Tom Larch kept his lamp oil down there for 30 years. When he retired in 1979, the parish took the building on, and nobody has been in the cellar since. He paused. Tom was a particular man, methodical, everything in its place. Another pause. I helped him move out. He was deliberate about what he left down there. More deliberate than you'd expect for a man moving out of a storage cellar. What did he leave? Frank looked at the trap door again. He had the expression of a man who knows more than he is saying and is deciding how much to say it. "Go careful when you open it," he said. Then he turned and went back down the lane. She also met, in that first week, a woman named Cora Bellamy, who ran the Fenwick Historical Society out of 2 rooms above the old corn exchange, and who had seen Meg coming and going from the hut, and had come to introduce herself with the directness of someone who considers local history a matter of public concern. Cora was 72, angular, with the compressed energy of a person who has been finding things out for a very long time and is not tired of it. She said the hut was documented in parish records from 1847. She said Thomas Larch had held the post of parish lamplighter from 1949 until the conversion to electric street lighting in 1979, when the post was abolished and the hut decommissioned. She said that in the parish records from the 1960s, Larch was noted for something that the minutes described as a private charitable custom, the nature of which was not specified. "What custom?" Meg asked. "The minutes don't say. Whoever wrote them either didn't know or didn't think it needed to be recorded." Cora looked at her steadily. "Frank Sayers will know." He knew Tom Larch well. Meg went back to Frank Sayers that evening. He was in his front garden in the November cold, doing something to a rose that required a great deal of attention to the base of it, and he said without looking up, "You've been to see Cora." "I have. She sent you to me. More or less." He stood up. He had the look of a man who has been waiting for a question long enough that he is relieved when it arrives. "Tom Larch kept a jar on the windowsill of the hut," he said. "The south-facing one, from about 1955 onward. He put money in it, whatever he had in his pockets at the end of the week, whatever he could spare. And anyone in Fenwick who was struggling, for food, for a bill, for a school uniform, for whatever it was that month, could come to the hut between 6 and 7 on a Friday evening and take what they needed from the jar." He looked at the lane. He didn't ask questions. He didn't take names. He didn't tell anyone how much was in it. He just put money in the jar and left the door open on Friday evenings and trusted people to take what they needed. Meg said nothing for a moment. For how long? From about 1955 until he retired in 1979. 24 years. Frank looked at his rose. When the electric lights came and the post was abolished, he came out of the hut for the last time, and he locked the door, and he gave the key to the parish, and he walked home. I was there. I watched him. He didn't say anything about the jar or the cellar or what was in it. He paused. Tom was not the kind of man who explained himself. Meg walked back to the hut in the dark. She lit the camping lantern she had bought with her remaining £2.20. She stood over the trap door for a long time. Then she crouched down and took the iron ring in both hands and pulled. If you've been with this story from the beginning and haven't subscribed yet, now is exactly the right moment. What Meg found in that cellar is coming, and it is worth being here for. This is what the channel is for. Back to Sallow Lane. The cellar steps were stone, 4 of them, cut into the chalk subsoil, worn smooth at the center from decades of descent. The cellar itself was roughly 8 feet by 6, with chalk walls and a chalk floor, and a ceiling of the elm boards that formed the hut's floor above. And it smelled of mineral cold, and something underneath the cold that was oil and wax and time. Along the left wall were the original oil racks, iron brackets set into the chalk, still holding 2 empty glass carboys that caught the lantern light and held it in long amber shapes on the opposite wall. Along the right wall was a shelf, hand-built from pine, and on the shelf were 3 things. The first was a jar. Not on the windowsill. Not anymore. It had been brought down here when Tom Larch left. Placed on this shelf deliberately, a wide-mouthed mason jar, the old sort with a rubber seal and a glass lid. Inside it, Meg could see. She held the lantern close. Money, folded notes, held together with a rubber band that had perished and crumbled but still held the shape of a bundle. And beneath the notes, coins, old coins, she could see, pre-decimal, the thick copper kind. The second was a ledger, narrow, cloth-bound in green, its spine still straight. She opened it and found, in a handwriting so small and even it looked machine-made, a record. The name of every person who had come to the jar on a Friday evening, and the date, and the amount they had taken, and where Tom Larch had managed to learn it without asking. One line about what the money was for. She read 3 entries at random. October 1961. Woman and 2 children, school coats. March 1967. Old man on Mill Road, gas bill past due. June 1972. Young fella just starting out, week's food while he waited for first wage. 61 entries. 61 people. Not one name. Just a note. Just a line. Just the fact of it, recorded so someone would know it had been real. The third was an envelope, set at the back of the shelf, leaning against the chalk wall. On the front, in the same small hand, to whoever tends the light next. She sat down on the bottom step and opened it. Tom Larch had written 2 pages, in the careful way of a man who had thought about every sentence before he wrote it down. He explained that the money in the jar was what remained of the last year's contributions, money he had put in himself, money that had gone unclaimed, money he could not in good conscience take back. He explained that he was leaving the ledger because he did not want the 61 people in it to be forgotten by everyone, even if they would never know they had been remembered. He explained that the jar and the ledger and the note were for the person who came after, not whoever bought the building for the easiest reason, but whoever came into it carefully and opened the cellar when they were ready and not before, and who would understand, when they got there, what they were supposed to do. He wrote, at the bottom of the second page, the jar is for filling. That is its only purpose. Put what you can in it, and leave the door open on Friday evenings, and don't ask people what they need it for. They already know. You don't need to. The money in the jar was £47.30 in old currency. She had it assessed at a coin dealer in Ipswich, who was patient about the quantity, and who told her that, in current collector value, accounting for the pre-decimal coins, the total came to £312. Not a fortune. Not nothing. She put it in a bank account she opened with that specific purpose, and no other. Cora Bellamy came to the hut the following week, and Meg showed her the ledger. Cora held it in both hands with the deliberateness of someone who understands they are handling something that matters, and sat at the small table Meg had acquired. A refectory table, purchased for £8 at the church sale, and read every entry. When she finished, she set the ledger down and was quiet for a long moment. Then she said, "He kept everyone's dignity. He took the names down, but he didn't use them. Just the fact that they came." She looked at the ledger. He wanted the count to exist somewhere. Not the names. The count. Frank came the week after, when Meg told him what she'd found. He stood at the cellar steps and looked down into the lantern-lit space, and he did not say anything for a long time. Then he said, "I knew he'd left something. I just didn't know what." He came back up the steps and stood in the room. He was that kind of man. He said it the way you say something that explains everything else. Meg deferred her university place for a year, then renewed the deferral for a second, then eventually enrolled in a distance learning program that she completed over 3 years while living in the hut. She was good at working within constraints. She had been practicing since she was 9. She spent the first winter making the hut weathertight and then livable, in that order. Frank helped with the roof tiles and would not take money for his time, so she cooked him a meal every Thursday for 4 months, which was the kind of trade she thought he would accept, and he did. Cora sourced her a proper small wood-burning stove, second-hand, cast iron, perfectly sound, through a contact who was clearing a farmhouse sale. A woman from the parish who heard about Meg through Jim Healy turned up one Saturday with a load of proper insulation in the back of her estate car and spent the afternoon helping fit it, and would not give her name, and left before Meg could work out how to properly thank her. Fenwick was that kind of town, in certain corners of it. By the spring the hut was warm and dry, and hers. She had a table and a chair, and the box of Dory's books on a shelf she had made from boards and bricks, and a camping stove that she used until the wood burner was in, and a routine that was ordered and plain, and nothing like what she had expected her life at 19 to look like, and entirely like what she needed. In the spring she put a jar on the windowsill, the south-facing one, the one with the morning light. She put what she could in it, not much in those early months, but something. She left the door open on Friday evenings from 6 to 7. She did not tell anyone, except Frank, who she told the same week she placed the jar, because it seemed right that he should know. The first Friday, nobody came. The second Friday, nobody. The third Friday, in April, she heard footsteps on the lane, and then a pause. And then the low door pushed open, and a woman came in quickly, and went to the jar and took something from it, and left without speaking. Meg was sitting at the table with her back to the window, and she did not turn around. She refilled the jar the following week. The news reached Barry Croft through Callum, who had seen a short piece about the Lamplighter's hut on the Fenwick Parish website. A note about the historic building's restoration, and a photograph that the parish had asked to take for their newsletter, and that showed the hut from the lane in the February sun, looking exactly what it was. Callum showed it to Barry, apparently, over the phone, in the tone of someone sharing something they expect to prompt a specific reaction. Barry rang on a Thursday evening, the first time he had called since the Sunday in November when the door had closed. He said he'd seen the photograph. He said the building looked nice. He said it in the measured voice of a man choosing his words without knowing what the right words are. He asked how she was getting on. She said she was well. He said he was glad to hear it. There was a pause. He said, "You've made something of it, then." He said it plainly, without the comparative register he usually worked in, without the implication of a standard being applied. Just the fact of it. said plainly, in the voice of a man who was perhaps a different person on a Thursday in May than he had been on a Sunday in November. "I have," she said. She didn't say anything else. She didn't need to. She said she needed to get back to the Friday preparations, and she meant it, and he said of course, and they said goodbye. She put down the phone and stood at the south window and looked at the jar on the sill, which had money in it and would have more by the end of the week, and she thought about Tom Larch coming out of this hut for the last time in 1979 and locking the door and handing over the key and walking home without explanation. And she thought about what it costs to do the right thing quietly for 24 years and then simply stop and trust the building to carry it forward. It costs less than you think. That was the thing. It costs less than the alternative, which is to leave nothing and trust nothing, and find in the end that you were right not to. That the world contains exactly as much generosity as you were willing to put into it, and no more. The jar stayed on the sill. The door stayed open on Friday evenings. The money in the dedicated account grew slowly, the way slow things do, and 3 years after she found the cellar, when she had more to give than she'd had at the start, she used it to quietly cover 3 months of heating costs for an elderly man on Mill Road whose name she never knew and who would not have known who to thank if he'd tried. She was 19 years old, and she had been thrown out. She owned a bin bag, a box of books, and £3.20 in British currency. She spent one of those pounds on a listed flint hut at the end of her own lane, and she went into the oil cellar when she was ready and not before, and she found something that had been left in the chalk dark for 44 years by a man who understood that the only point of keeping a thing safe is to pass it on. What Thomas Larch understood, and what Meg came to understand, is that the most durable light is not the kind that runs on oil or electricity. It is the kind a person keeps deliberately in a jar on a windowsill for anyone who needs to see by it. That kind of light does not go out when the lamp does. It passes from one pair of hands to the next, down the years, quietly, without asking to be noticed. She was 19 and thrown out. She had £1. She bought a hut at the end of her own lane, and she opened the cellar when she was ready. And what she found there was not just a jar of old money and a ledger of 61 quiet acts. It was proof that someone had tended the light faithfully for 24 years and had trusted, when the time came, that someone else would carry it on. She carries it on. Thank you for being here for this story. If it moved you, if it reminded you of a person who did something quietly for a long time without needing anyone to know, please share it with someone who might need it today. And if you haven't subscribed yet, I hope you will. It is how this channel keeps finding these stories. My question for this week is one I mean sincerely. Has there ever been a person in your life who helped you without asking anything in return, and who you found out about only later, or only by accident? I'd love to read your answer in the comments. Those are the ones that stay with me longest. See you in the next one.